Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum. So today I have a very special guest with me, Habib Akande. We will be talking, inshallah, about the topic of women of desire. We'll be talking about some of the barriers that get in the way of female pleasure, and we'll be talking about how you can become a sexually empowered woman. And this live will be mostly for women, but I think that if men are tuning in, they will have a lot to learn as well. So thank you so much to all of you who are here already. And I can see that Brother Habib is here, so I'm going to add him on. Just trying to get this to work. It's not allowing me to click on him for some reason. Okay, it's working.
Assalamu
Hi,
alaikum. Wa alaikum salam. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Alhamdulillah.
I feel like it's been a while since we've done this. How have you been doing since then?
Yeah, very well. No complaints to be fair. Looking forward to Freedom Day on Monday
Yeah,
and obviously Eid
alhamdulillah.
on Tuesday. So yeah, to be honest, I've got no complaints on my side.
Yeah, no, definitely. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Well, thank you for agreeing to do this with me. I've got your book and I have your previous book as well. And I love reading your work. It's for me, I find it like very calming to read. Like it's very reassuring to read. Because unfortunately, what we see out there doesn't always agree with what I do. Like I'm sure you receive the same, like quite a lot of backlash. And I think reading your book just makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. So thank you for that. So I'd love it if you could just start off just kind of introducing yourself just to anyone who doesn't really know about you, just a little bit about the work that you do, and also kind of a little bit about what kind of got you started in this work.
Sure. So my name is Habib Akande, British born, Nigerian writer, sex educator and historian. Um, So by profession, I'm actually a chartered accountant, but I'm not going to speak about that because that's quite a boring profession. I've published 7 books so far, mainly exploring race erotology, which is a study of desire and sexual intimacy, um, mainly from like an Islamic or African perspective. I studied in Al Azhar for 3.5 years. I spent 2 years in the high school, and then graduated, and then spent a year in a year and a half in the uni before dropping out because I wanted to make a living for myself. And yeah, so since I came back from studying in Egypt, I came back in 2009. I wanted to, because I came across a number of books written by traditional Islamic scholars such as Imam al-Suyuti, writing about ilm al the erotology or the study of sex, and they were very I was awe-inspired, to be honest, because again, you've got, respected scholars like Al-Suyuti and others who wrote many books about the importance of female pleasure, about female sexuality, and educating men about the importance of about understanding women's needs, both physical and emotional needs. And again, given that I found I couldn't come across many books in the English language that these books hadn't been translated, so I went about wanting to translate, and not only translate but bring to life some of these historic books, and then again make it accessible for modern day readers, both Muslim and non-Muslim. Because I think one of the issues is that, and what I noticed actually, is that I published my first book on the area of erotology called The Taste of Honey in 2015. Um, it's more like an academic textbook, so to speak, because I wanted to back up with a lot of references from the Quran, Hadith, and what traditional scholars have said, because I knew there'll be backlash. But that wasn't as well received, and I think we spoke about this in our previous IG live on my page. And I think one of the reasons was because maybe it was probably too much information, and maybe the packaging of it. And I realized that a number of Muslims, like when I started to write about sex and intimacy, but from an an African perspective, like with the Kunyaza book, it was more received by Muslims, both practicing, not practicing, and what have you. So I thought that I think it's maybe the marketing and maybe the packaging of when you're presenting some information, and I think some Muslims want to know about this information, both men and women, but are quite fearful when they hear Islam or Muslim attached to it, which can be quite difficult because I think they still need to hear this information. So that's why I was like, okay, for the latest book for the Women of Desire, I wanted to highlight the role that women have played, not just empowered, but sexually empowered women and what that means. So to help not only women, sex educators like yourself, but also people looking for resources, I wanted to write a kind of a short, concise book, but filled with maybe like some resources if people wanted to know, get further information about like vaginismus, which obviously you're an expert on it, or like masturbation or trying to orgasm, or a lot of issues. I wanted to kind of create like an encyclopedia so to be very concise where to know that A, there are resources available, and B, as much as it might come across as quite revolutionary, it's not, in a sense, that because we have got a rich tradition both in the Arab world and the Muslim world of Muslim women who are sexually empowered and spoke about intimacy issues. And I wanted to showcase a range of them. And that's why I listed about 40, just to show the diversity of Muslim women from the time of the Prophet, even from the Quran to recent times, that have been sexually empowered. And what does it mean to be sexually empowered? Because I think that term has been hijacked maybe by some people, and I think people associate sexual empowered or sexually liberated to mean promiscuous, when that doesn't necessarily mean that. So I wanted to create a space where Muslim women in particular can feel comfortable. So that's kind of like what my aim, and obviously to normalize desire and even some intimacy problems that people are going through, so at least they can then, you know, kind of access this type of information, which I think is important.
Yeah, amazing. And I like that you said that to normalize desire. I think that's so important. And obviously the topic of this IG Live is Women of Desire, and so is the name of your book. And what I want to ask is, why did you call it Women of Desire, and what actually is a woman of desire?
That's a very good question. Okay, so there was a number of reasons. Okay, so there's a tradition. Some people attribute this tradition to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Some people attribute it to Ali bin Abi Talib. Some people attribute it to a Persian sex educator called Bunyan Dakht, which basically the tradition says that God created desire into 10 parts. He gave 9 parts to women and 1 part to men. But Allah also gave women a greater form, a greater amount of haya, or whatever you want to translate it to be, modesty or shyness or bashfulness, and that inner strength that He didn't give men, and that's why women are able to, you can say, control themselves more than men. But the whole idea was that the secret to women's desire is that women have a greater capacity for sexual desire and sexual pleasure than men have. Like they've got a greater blessing in that regard, and that was to women in general. So that's part of the reason of that, like inspired by that particular tradition. And also I wanted to make it all encompassing, because if I hadn't called it Woman of Desire, then it's like this specific woman, when I wanted to reflect and show the diversities that women in plural have desire, and what it means to be a woman of desire. And again, it's a play over the words as well, because it doesn't just necessarily mean desire for intimacy. It could be desire for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're the person of faith that desires Allah. Also, you've got these. So it's just it's a title that intentionally is it can mean many things. So it doesn't. But the whole idea is it kind of encompasses, trying to be as inclusive as possible. And also, like I said, kind of like a sideway nod to that particular tradition, which I was kind of really inspired by. So your second question was, sorry, I thought.
So you kind of did touch on it, like what is a woman of desire? You did say every woman has desire, and you wanted your title to reflect that all women have desire.
Yes, and to normalize and to recognize that from an Islamic or Arabic perspective, desire doesn't necessarily have the negative connotation that it has in the Christian tradition. And I think it's important that people understand that, because obviously us as English speakers, when we think about desire, or generally how it's translated is in lust, people think about the Christian understanding, and this is one of the 7 deadly sins, when Islamically, desire in and of itself is not blameworthy, it's not wrong, it's how it's exercised, or how you action on it. So it's some people, even when I spoke to someone that I respect, they were like, okay, people might misinterpret it to mean like Lady of the Night, meaning a sex
Mm.
worker. And I was like, okay, it's got multiple meanings, but then isn't the problem that when you ascribe desire to a woman, all of a sudden you automatically assume she's exercising that desire in the wrong way, because it's like you assume that women shouldn't have desire, and then this idea that especially a woman of faith should be asexual. That's this whole kind of and I kind of wanted to delve into that, and then also looking at Western psychologists and the whole Madonna whore complex, and that's something that a lot of people talk about, and some Muslims have taken that upon themselves, when traditionally a lot of the early Muslim scholars didn't have this idea that a woman, a virtuous woman, is devoid of desire. They didn't have that idea, whereas they actually had the opposite, that a woman, a virtuous woman, is the most desirous. Not only desirous, but has the most desire herself. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So it's a very, and that's what I wanted to bring to light, that, okay, even the way we understand desire, the way that we understand women and sensuality and spirituality is at odds from what the early Muslims and early Arabs understood. And that's what I was like, okay, I need to have a title or explain it in a way that is digestible to the modern reader, but also making sure that they have understand where I'm kind of coming from with the history. So 'cause I didn't want to go too much into the history, make it quite theoretical. I wanted to make it practical, but in order to get to the practicality and providing tips and advice to help people, I think people kind of needed to understand where I was kind of coming from. So that's kind of like, yeah.
Amazing. No, I love that you shared that. And what I wanted to talk about in terms of desire is I think that some people confuse the fact that if they have desire for anything in this life, whether it's sex or food or anything really, they confuse that they are not spiritual, they're not religious, because they are desiring the dunya too much. Whereas what you're kind of saying in this book and all your books actually is that desire is normal, and it's important for us to normalize desire. And not only is desire normal, the way you channel your desire can actually lead to greater spiritual intimacy at the same time.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So I wanted to ask you, in the work that you do, and also I guess in the work that I do, I noticed that quite a lot of women have these kind of barriers to female pleasure. So there are things like they have the desire, they, like as you mentioned, all women have desire. Maybe some women don't fully access it because, you know, due to their upbringing, they've been taught to kind of shut it down, but all women have a desire, whether it's the desire for intimacy, connection, friendship, love. We have some form of desire, the desire for sex itself. But then they go into that activity, the sexual activity with their spouse, and they struggle with female pleasure. So why do you think women especially struggle with female pleasure so much? What are the barriers that you are noticing, and how can women go about starting to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, that's very, it's an important question. I think from what I've seen and the messages that I receive and speaking to different people, both men and women alike, I think one of the biggest barriers is that I think a number of women, unfortunately, this is both Muslim and non-Muslim, but Muslim women in particular, feel as if they're not worthy of desire, and that prevents them, or worthy of pleasure, sorry. So they feel
Yeah.
they're not worthy of pleasure. So I see a number of like feelings of inadequacy, questions about like whether I'm normal, and questioning themselves a lot. And then I'm glad you asked a question about pleasure as opposed to sex, because there are a number of people that are having sex, but not necessarily a number of people that are actually enjoying the sex, right, or experiencing pleasure. And they're two different things. And again, one of the reasons I think a lot of women have been socially conditioned or culturally brought up in an environment where they believe that sex or sexual pleasure is for the man, and then any pleasure that they experience is dirty, it's Islamic or spiritual, and it's not something that they should kind of celebrate. So a number of women have, I think, because they've got this in their mind and what they've been brought up with, taught, their mind is shut down, there's disconnect between their mind and their body. So that's why even before speaking about pleasure, the desire needs to be, they need to activate it as well. It needs to awaken. So I think, and that's where, whether that is, again, there's different ways of women can do that, whether it's, positive affirmations, or whether it's reading certain things that's kind of like reminding themselves about that they're worthy of pleasure, and they are a desirous person, and a person of sensuality, and a person of spirituality, and they can all be intertwined in the same person. not
Yeah.
that you're egoless. And I think again that comes down to this whole Madonna Hall complex. I think a number of people, women included in particular, sorry, have um, maybe digested and believed incorrectly. Um, but I think a lot of it comes down to, yeah, the biggest barrier is that a lot of women do not feel worthy of pleasure. And I think, and
Mm.
again, there's a number of reasons for that, whether it's cultural, social environment that they grew up in. But I think, yeah, it's definitely feelings of like not being worthy of desire for pleasure.
Yeah. Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And I wanted to ask, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, where you said, in certain Arab tradition or African tradition or Muslim tradition, sex wasn't seen as this dirty thing. It was actually seen as the opposite, something to bring you closer to God and to have a spiritual experience when engaging in sexual activity. But for those women that I just mentioned, where they're struggling to access female pleasure, maybe due to their faith, maybe due to their upbringing, what would you say specifically to Muslim women where you can bring things out from Islam, from the Quran, from the Hadith to help them to feel like they have the right to be sexually empowered? So they're on this journey where they're listening to this live, for example, and they're like, I haven't had an orgasm, or I don't know what sexual pleasure is meant to feel like, or I've tried and it's just not working. Those women in that place right now, they're struggling with their faith and their sexuality. What would you say to those women? A few things coming from Islam and the Islamic tradition that can make them kind of shift their mindset around sex.
First and foremost, it starts with empowerment and education, and by obviously empowerment, I mean you can empower yourself and not waiting for someone to um, give you like all of the solutions. And I think like and I know it's a difference between the number, and I'm generalizing here, between men and women, is that because maybe men we feel entitled to pleasure, there's nothing that stops us, whether you're practicing, not practicing, knowledgeable, not knowledgeable, from trying to find that information kind of thing to validate what you feel you're entitled to. Whereas if you don't feel you're entitled to something, then it's going to be very difficult to try and access this type of information. But the information is out there, but you need to empower yourself. And again, I'm saying this to put the onus on the person, because the information is there, but it's whether you want to go and access it. Now, in
Yeah.
terms of obviously where to find that, obviously there's different resources. There's, like yourself, there's different IG lives, there's books and things, but you first need to realize that you have the power, obviously, by the will of Allah, to find out this information. Now, many people still can hear this live. They can be hear hadiths of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, legitimizing women's sensuality and talking about women have the right to pleasure in the bedroom, but because they don't believe it themselves, it's going to be still very hard to access to kind of. So that's why a lot of it comes from within themselves, and that's why for me, when I speak about empowerment, it's like you have to give yourself your own agency, not wait for
Yeah.
someone to empower you, not wait until, even if you're not married, not wait until you're married and then you find a emotionally available, really good man that's going to give you all of the tools to empower yourself. No, you can empower yourself whether prior to marriage or during marriage or after marriage. And I think
Yeah.
this whole idea of waiting for someone to kind of give me the answers, I think this is what's maybe doing a disservice to a number of Muslims and Muslim women in particular. So that can come across as quite harsh, because I think and this is men and women I've noticed within the Muslim communities, like we want to be spoon fed. We want to go to
Mm.
the imam, we want to go to the religious scholar, we want to go to, and they're going to tell us all the answers. When we speak about like finding a job, making friendship in our day-to-day lives, we don't go for assistance in that regard. We know generally what
Yeah.
the parameters are, but you find these things organically, or you find this information. But when it comes to the realm of sex and sensuality, it's like, no, we need a rule book, playbook that's going to tell me A to Z exactly how.
Mm.
And it doesn't work like that. And that's why even with what I've tried to do with my book, and even with the earlier books, there were guides. There were
Mm.
not a formula telling you, you do this, you do that. There's some things like even the presentation of certain books or certain speakers, it's not going to suit everyone, and that's fine. But again, this whole idea of having a guide is that you take what suits you, what is in alignment with what you're comfortable with, and then you take it from there. So with me, like I said, a lot of things, what I'm trying to say, it starts with empowerment, but it comes from you yourself, that you need to empower yourself. And I think you need to believe that first and foremost. And if you believe that, then you go about trying to educate yourself, trying to find out these resources to kind of know, okay, now I've got the knowledge, now I've got the education. I won't have this, hopefully these stumbling blocks that's preventing me from accessing pleasure. Then you can know about actually how to enjoy yourself in terms of like with your spouse and things like that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's really relevant because what I'm seeing in women especially is that sometimes the reason that they struggle to access pleasure sexually is because of messages they heard growing up, whether it's from parents, friends, community around them, but they didn't actively seek out those messages. Those messages were put on them. Whereas what
Yeah,
you're saying is educate yourself. So go and find out the information rather than just absorbing information from people which may have some truth in it, but quite a lot of negativity to it. Go and find out the information for yourself because that's truly the way to be empowered.
yeah. And the reason why I'm saying that is because and maybe again, maybe this is my male privilege or what have you, but I know that there'll be those negative messages, and I can't stop them. But what you can do is balance or try and balance it by attaining some positive messages that you seek yourself to kind of counteract those negative messages that you're getting, kind of thing. So I'm not trying to like paint a picture where we can create a world where there'll be no negative messaging that you'll get, because unfortunately we're bombarded with those negative messaging. But the same way, like for example, on your Instagram feed, the people you follow, you can create your own kind of world in terms of what you want to watch and see that's going to empower you. So you can, if you want, you can kind of just complain about all of the negative stuff on the hundreds of thousands of Instagram accounts, or you can just concentrate on, you know, create your own like little world. And that's what I'm trying to kind of get, that there are these resources available. And that's why I didn't want to come. And I find this a lot, actually, to be fair. And that's why I don't do many IG lives with different people, because I prefer to come from a position of, rather than just talking about the problems, let's talk about like some solutions, practical solutions, or how you can kind of, you know, come out of those kind of problems. So that's kind of like, I'm trying to be more forward thinking rather than just kind of like, and I don't want to just celebrate the past, because I think as Muslims as well, we have a tendency, and that's what I didn't want to do, was just to celebrate, oh, mashallah, in early Islam, we had all of these great people and the women were empowered and this, that, and the other. And, you know, that's nice, it's all well and good, but there has to be a sense of selfishness. The same way when we leave this world, it's going to be nafsi, nafsi, myself, myself. When you're speaking about desire and pleasure, and there's something which Esther Perel says, and a couple of other psychologists, about female desire being narcissistic, but in a good way.
I was
That you
literally going
need
to come
to,
to that.
yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. No, because I asked you like what are the kind of barriers, why are women struggling to access female pleasure, and you kind of started talking about men, and men don't have this problem because they feel entitled to it. So I was going to ask you, does that mean that, and you kind of did mention it, but does that mean that women need to start believing they're worthy of pleasure, as you mentioned, but also feeling like I'm entitled to pleasure. I'm married now, I'm entitled to that, and really seeing it as their right. Like maybe they know logically, like they've been told, okay, sexual pleasure is your right for both the wife and the husband. They know that logically, but they don't really fully step into it. They don't believe that they're entitled to it. So do they need to start feeling entitled to pleasure? And do they need to, as you mentioned, start being more narcissistic when it comes to sexual pleasure?
Yeah, 100%. And I would prefer like your wording when you said entitled as opposed to worthy, because I can be worthy for something, but I still might not feel entitled or feel deserving of it. It's because I'm waiting for someone to kind of give it to me. Whereas if you feel entitled to something, you're more likely to demand. And I'm explicitly using the word demand because men, we're not afraid to demand our rights in the bedroom.
Yeah.
But and women, and we again, there are examples of during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where women demanded their rights, not asked, demanded their rights, and that's something that I think women need to possess as well, because it's because a lot of the messages that I receive is like with women, for example, struggling to climax or enjoy a pleasure in the bedroom with their husband, and the first question I ask, have you spoke to him? It's like, no, and it's like. Again, I'm like, if you haven't even had this conversation with your husband, first and foremost, why are you coming to me? Yeah, I'm not going to come to your bedroom. I'm not going to speak to your husband. And even if I'm just, that's not the way to go about it. First and foremost, speak to him, like try and rectify. And that's the thing that a lot of men struggle with. And I'm not just sticking up for the brothers, is that a lot of women do not communicate desire effectively. They communicate, but not effectively. And what I mean by that is that you can say, you can give indication, and again, some of it could be because of the way women were brought up. They believe that they shouldn't initiate, they shouldn't show, because some men unfortunately have been miseducated to believe that if a woman's initiating intimacy, it means she's loose or this, that, and the other. So I can understand why some women are reserved in that respect. But at the same time, if you're not communicating desire with your spouse, he's not a mind reader. He's going to be none the wiser. And a lot of men have been miseducated the way a number of women have been miseducated in this realm. And that's why I think, rather than, again, waiting for men to empower you, you need to empower yourself and feel entitled and be entitled to pleasure. Know that you deserve pleasure, and then demand it as well if you're not fulfilled. And then it leaves men in a predicament that, okay, I need to step up or it's going to be an issue. But if you're not demanding that, and again, I'm using the word demand rather than asking or just feeling worthy, you're not going to enjoy pleasure. And the whole idea of, female desire being narcissistic, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong because obviously you're a woman, but the whole idea that a woman needs to feel desired first and foremost before she can experience desire, if that's the case for a number of women, that's why even she needs to retrain her mind to feel that she's worthy of desire, not just, oh, okay, I demand desire. I read this good book and I went on this really good course with Sister Amira and she was speaking about, I need this right, but she doesn't believe it herself. Yeah. So it might require some retraining or some time to get to that point where you actually really believe. And the thing I would say is, like, when it comes to motherhood, women feel entitled and believe, rightly so, that they deserve to be mothers and this bond and things. No one needs to train them or teach them otherwise. But when it comes to, and I'm used to not, and I won't use the word wife because a wife could just be a partner or co-parent, but a lover, I don't think a lot of women have taken that on board in terms of what like, I deserve to be a lover and I deserve to be a sensual being, I deserve to be fulfilled. And that's just, I think that, and it does have to come from within. For every woman is different, but she needs to empower herself first and foremost to believe that she's entitled to this experience.
100%. I couldn't agree more, and I agree with you in that a woman does need to feel desired, but what I'm seeing, the issue there is sometimes their husband isn't showing them the desire that they expect. Like, their husband isn't showing the wife that I desire you, or maybe he's showing it in certain ways that the wife doesn't really want or doesn't resonate with. But the wife doesn't need to wait for the husband to show desire. The wife needs to believe within herself that she is sexy and beautiful, and she desires herself and knows that Allah desires her, Allah created her, and just really step into that, like really believing that I am sexually attractive and I'm desirous. And when you do step into that, I really feel that that is a really big turn on for women and can get a woman feeling really sexually aroused. And that's the main thing that needs to start. That kind of feeling desired turns into that arousal state and then can lead to her initiating sex. But then she also needs to feel comfortable in initiating sex. And I think some women are afraid, like, of rejection or being turned down, or not just that, being seen as like slutty and that kind of thing. Like, it holds them back from, you kind of mentioned it earlier at the beginning of this live, where, women have 9 parts of desire, but they kind of don't fully act on it because of that shame. And I think that there's this confusion that a woman is only virtuous if she holds herself and holds in her desire and doesn't show it. And that's why I think a lot of women just wait for the husband to initiate it.
Yes, that's true. And I think the problem of perfectionism, I think, is something that a lot of women, and I would say, suffer from, as in this idea to be perfect all the time. And I don't think as men we have that as much. Again, I'm generalizing here, because whether you're talking about sex, intimacy, relationships, life in general, it's never perfect. But when you have this idea that you need to be the perfect person, the perfect wife, you need to look, perfect even in the bedroom, it will prevent you from enjoying, because you can't let go, you can't be loose. Do you understand what I'm getting at? And there's so much pressure that I think when the women go into the bedroom, that they have these even expectations, that they're very conscious of how he's perceiving me, how my body may look, as my stomach, and that's again because they've this idea that I need to. And again, this is a lot of it's in the mind, because you ask most men, 9 out of 10 of them, they're not thinking about all of these things in terms of the way she looks. So that's why a lot of it involves like retraining the mind, and it's a lot of it's mental. But again, women have to believe that they can change how they think about themselves and how they think about the world, rather than waiting for someone to kind of tell them this is what you need, so to speak. So that's why, and even with some of these problems, even with how you frame it or how the woman frames it, are they problems or are they challenges? Because if it's like a problem, it's like a building. It's just like, oh, there's two. And when you see problem after problem after problem, it's like, when you see it's a challenge, it's no something I need to overcome. So it's a
Yeah.
different way of looking at it. So even with men, there's a lot of men that have a number of problems, but those that are, you could say, successful is that those that see these problems as challenges, because then they're more likely to overcome this. Or, okay, I might not be able to do X, Y, and Z, but this is what I can do. Do you understand what I'm getting at? And there will be problems. There will always be problems. But again, maybe just reframing how we view things and looking at these problems as challenges, and then see, okay, how can I overcome this? Because you will never be able to come all of your problems and be the perfect person. Again, this is what comes down to this whole perfectionism thing, that if I get rid of all of this, then I'll be able to enjoy the best sex of my life, be really fulfilled. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And that's why even not only normalizing desire, even like with, I want to like normalize challenges or problems, in the sense that, okay, it's okay if you're having some of these issues, because everyone has issues, kind of thing. But it's not like your marital life has to be perfect all the time, kind of thing. I just think that's, again, an unrealistic pressure that people place on themselves.
Yeah. And it kind of feeds back into what we were saying about women feeling entitled. I think that if you feel entitled, there's no kind of restrictions on that, because you're like, regardless of how I look, what my marital life is like, or all these other external things, regardless of that, I'm still entitled to this. So I think the mindset that women need to start adopting, because I think men already are there. They don't kind of, most men, I think, they don't put restrictions on their entitlement to pleasure. They don't say, I'm too overweight, therefore I can't have pleasure with my wife. They don't think all those kind of things, whereas women tend to do that. And I think, like you're saying, that it is a mindset thing and it is going to take time, but you don't have to wait, as you're saying, for everything to be perfect to start having an orgasm and enjoying sex with your husband.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, I had a really interesting conversation earlier today, and this is with a non-Muslim, because I was writing an article, I was pitching an article for Female Orgasm Day, which obviously is on next month, and they were petrified by the idea of writing about, and I've written for them before, the idea of celebrating female pleasure. It's like, they were like, oh, if you come back and write about consent or FGM, like, again, problems. I was like, no, okay, this is a day that's celebrating, not just, oh, it's a day so every woman can have an orgasm. No, it's about educating both men and women about the female anatomy and women's right to pleasure, this, that, and the other. But it's ultimately, it's a day to celebrate women's sexual pleasure. And they just, both the woman I was speaking to and the senior editors, a man, it's just like, they were really scared when it comes, and I've had this a number of times, to be fair, and I'm still trying to get my head around it. This is not Muslims; these aren't people from, the Arab world or the African continent. But a lot of people seem to be scared or intimidated by women's sexual pleasure, and that's why, I liked how you subtitled the talk about looking at pleasure rather than sex, because if we said sex, oh yeah, you can have sex, but pleasure is a total different experience altogether. So that's still something I'm still trying to get my head around. That why is it so many people are worried or petrified by women's pleasure as opposed to men's pleasure? But that's
Absolutely.
a different conversation altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Like someone here is saying that I think the biggest problem is that in the Muslim community, these issues are not spoken about. And once it does, females get labeled and judgment is made. Definitely. Completely agree with
Okay,
that.
with the sorry, go on. I don't want to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, again, I think, and this is something I wanted to show with the book, even as Muslims, and again, it's a mindset. You can just speak about all of the problems that, okay, the Muslim community, women don't have the ability to speak and men are this way. That's not the case for all Muslims. There are examples within the Muslim community, like yourself, of women who are empowering other women. So we can highlight those people and those figures, or we can just talk about all of the problems. So again, that comes down to the mindset. I know there's problems, I know there's issues, but why is it that we tend to spend so much time speaking about women who aren't able to, speak about intimacy and things like that, and not celebrate and learn from and be inspired by those that are, showing that no, that you can have a healthy relationship, and not all men are emotionally unavailable or unattentive. Do you understand what I mean? So I just think even with that,
Absolutely, and it's kind of
it's
like
just,
what you focus on grows. So if you're focusing on all the problems in the Muslim community, it's just gonna grow. Whereas if you focus on the good that people like yourself and the village auntie and the work I'm trying to do, if we focus on what we're trying to do to make a change, then inshallah that will grow. And what I really would love, and I don't know if it will ever reach it, but I would love to go back to the way it used to be. Like, I know you said you don't want to live in the past, but just like imagine what it was like for before Islam, for women were kind of used sexually, and then Islam came, and then they were liberated sexually and empowered sexually. I feel like now maybe women aren't necessarily being used sexually. I mean, some are, but it's more that the women are abusing themselves by holding themselves back from sexual pleasure. And I want to go back to a place where women can look to the historical figures that you mentioned in your book and think, I want to be like that. Like, these were women noted in history who had a very close relationship with Allah, but were sexually empowered.
okay, so I want to not necessarily challenge, but just hear more about what period in particular are you referring to that you'd like to go back to?
Oh God, I think the first one, let me remember it. The first one, because there was like the period, second or third period, one of those periods where it was like it kind of went backwards in the sense that you were saying that, I can't remember the name of it because I'm not good with history, but the first one or two when Islam arrived was really good. And then I think you said in one of the periods, I'm not sure if it was Abbasid. I can't remember, to be honest, because
Okay,
I'm not good at remembering.
so it wasn't during the era, is it? Okay, I'm not saying this to test you. I'm just asking, are you referring to the era, because I split according to the caliphate? So the Islamic era of the Prophet ﷺ and the four rightly guided caliphs, then the Abbasid era, no, then the Umayyad, then the Abbasid, then the Andalusian, and then the modern era. Which of those? And they're all different for different
So
reasons.
when I was reading through, I only remember that you, in one of the periods, you said that it felt like they were going backwards before Islam, and then the rest of them, like Andalusian was good, like in terms of there was periods of Andalusian. So like most of the periods were good, and then modern era obviously things started to change when you got to the modern era. But there was only one period that I remember where you mentioned that things were going away from Islam.
The Umayyad. See, that's the period after the Prophet. Okay, yes. So when you're saying the period you like to go back to, which are you saying any of those apart from the Umayyads?
Yeah,
is that
any of the ones that were good. Any of the ones that were good.
Okay, but even, and again, maybe I didn't do a good job. Actually, maybe I did, because I didn't want to just paint a rose painted idea that all of the women were liberated. No, there was, so even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when you had female companions and they were asking about their rights, their marital rights in the bedroom, to the point where some of the male companions were like, who's this woman to ask this type of question?
All right, yeah.
Now, again, that
So there was
indicates
still
that
that judgment back then.
yes, it's always been there. But what I was trying to illustrate is that there were women that were empowered, like the woman that was sent as the delegate for the other women. I'm speaking on behalf of women's rights. We hear that, you know, in the Quran, and you mentioned about the rights of the men, and what about us women? And then the Prophet ﷺ looked at his companions and said, have you not heard anyone say better speech about their religion? And they were surprised, like, you know, we didn't know women can speak like this. And this is an example of an empowered woman. She didn't wait to be in an environment where all of the women were empowered. Did you understand? Do you understand what I mean? So that's what I was trying to highlight. Okay, look at this. Look at this woman, and there's other women who complain about them not being sexually fulfilled, or them being with a husband who's not fulfilling their emotional rights. So these are examples, but even within that period, there were still men who were, you know, that they were taken aback by this. So I'm not trying to give this impression that at any point in Islamic history that all women were liberated and then they can, because there were still people who were like held reservations and had held very conservative views. But I was trying to focus on those empowered women, and these are women that we can be inspired by. Do you understand? I'm getting that, because I think, again, this idea that if we go back in history and then, you know, the women, you know, all of the men were chivalrous and then they brought us this and they look after us, that doesn't exist in terms of all men. That doesn't exist in history. When you look at history, it doesn't exist. you can pick those figures who are inspiring and empowering and then learn off those. And again, the way I look at it is that, okay, the work that you're doing, you can name probably on one or two hands how many Muslim, and then not only Muslim, how many Muslim hijab wearing women are speaking about what you're speaking about. So the fact that there's not that many, but you know there's a need, you can be an luminary in this period. So that's
Yeah.
something to actually, for me, that's like an inspiring thing, that not only people in your period, but people that come after you, inshallah, that can be inspired by you.
Yeah.
Do you know? So that's why, like, would you want to be one of many or one of very few?
That's true. That's so true.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that so much. And what I was going to say is what you're saying then essentially is you're trying to highlight in your book that there were challenges, but instead of focusing on the challenges, what the women, the sexually empowered women did at that time is they rose above the challenge and they demanded their right because they saw it as a right that Islam provided to them. And they were like, Islam is giving me this. Who am I to turn this down? Even though I'm getting backlash from the men who are looking at me strangely and thinking, who is this woman to ask this question? Actually, I'm not doing this because I'm worried about a man's approval or validation. I'm doing this because this is something Allah is giving me. And I'm just asking questions about this thing that Allah is giving me to make sure I'm doing it right, to make sure I'm not, falling into sin. So so if they can do it back then, we should be doing it now. So there
Exactly.
are many women in certain cultures and different religions that struggle with this. And so you're acknowledging that, yes, it is a struggle, but it's not impossible to overcome that struggle.
And,
Okay, so we're going to end soon, but I just wanted to point out in the book what I really love, and this is giving me inspiration for my book. What I really love, like the best thing about the book, I will say, is the fact that the chapters are short. Like the chapters I'm writing at the moment are quite long,
yeah,
maybe a bit like your previous book was a bit longer. That's how
yeah,
I feel like my book is, because this is my first book and my chapters are quite long. But when I was reading this, it's really easy to read. So I remember messaging you, I think it was last week, where I was like, I got the book and I'm reading it. And then you were like, okay, finish the book. And I was like, okay, I'll finish the book. And it's such a nice, easy read. And that's a good thing, because sometimes I think people can write books and then people will buy the books and then never read them. Whereas this
yeah,
one, mashallah, is really easy to read. And I like that you split it into like a specific chapter per issue. So if a woman's struggling with desire and she's single, you've got a chapter on that. If a woman's struggling with painful sex, if a woman is struggling to orgasm, sex for elderly women or older women, all those kinds of things. I love that you have it like kind of in separate chapters, and each chapter, I think the longest chapter was just like a few pages. Some chapters were like a page or two, and I love that because it's just like a woman can look through and then just be like, that's what I'm struggling with, and go straight to the chapter. So I'm assuming this was done intentionally.
yeah. It was. I learned from A Taste of Honey, which I spent, like I told you before, 10 years researching a number of late late night hours, like in libraries. God knows how many books I've written to research, because with that book I wanted to show the information and the resources again, and also again if people wanted to do further reading. But then I realized, like what you mentioned, that a lot of people wasn't reading it. Like again, if it's too condensed, it's just like people get lost in it, and some people just want to know, okay, where I can find. And I thought, okay, people be able to go to the people don't read books like that, especially this day and age. So it was actually funny enough, after A Taste of Honey, I wrote another book, but it was aimed at men, and it was written that way as well. But then a number of women were buying it, and I was like, no, but I'm not saying you can't buy it, but this book is actually written for men. But I know I can read this book; it's easy for me to read. And then I realized, oh, okay, it's the presentation. It wasn't necessarily the content as such, because again, very geared towards men, but it was just something that's very easy to read. And then a number of people said that, so that's why I was just thinking, okay, I need to make it accessible. And I was always thinking of the acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I'm always remembering that, like, just, and that's very difficult to achieve, because you want to kind of make it concise, but also you want to give value. You don't want to be
Yeah.
like, oh, it's a really small book, and then you're charging people X amount. They're like, why am I paying for this? But and that's where the editing process is coming in. And I think one of the things that when you, as a writer, can read your own book again and again, then you know you're onto a winner. Because when you can read it and digest it, okay, that's something that I tried to do with this one. So I'm glad you was able to, you got what I was trying to do. So that's good.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. And it's helpful because the purpose of your book, inshallah, is to help people, and it's
Yeah.
only possible to help people with your book if they actually read it. So you've done it perfectly, mashallah. So on the note of the book, you know, it's quite easy to get, you know, from Amazon here in the UK, but where else, you know, if someone's not living in the UK, where else can people order your book?
Yeah, so Amazon and on my website, Rabat, RABAAH.com/store. It's available there internationally. It will be on Amazon US for international orders, and anyone in Nigeria is in Tarbiyah Book Plus, which is like the leading Islamic bookstore in Nigeria. So they're at the moment the three places that the book's available. But yeah, I think I might try and contact a couple of independent. One thing I will say, I've not targeted Muslim bookstores. I'm just kind of doing the natural, organic online route just because, and I think, well, hopefully you won't get this with your book, but it's a challenge getting books into, especially like books about sex and intimacy, into like Islamic bookstores. And then with the mainstream, we can maybe talk about this online. It's a different challenge because in terms of what they want in terms of discounts and stuff like that. So I'm kind of now just doing it either on Amazon or just kind of like from my website. They're the two main places, and
Yeah.
Tarbiyah, like I said, in Nigeria.
Yeah, and I think that's, inshallah, that's all that you need. I don't know, like how many people are still going to bookstores nowadays. I used to do it quite a lot, but with, you know, the pandemic, I've hardly been in a bookstore. So it is a lot easier if people are able to, you know, find it on your website or on Amazon and order it and have it delivered. Inshallah, it would be great, you know, for more bookstores to become more accepting of this, books on this topic. But you know, instead of focusing on the problems, like we said, let's focus on the good things, inshallah.
So,
Thank you so much, Habib. It was a pleasure talking to you today. Is there anything
thank you
else you
for
wanted to
inviting
say
me.
before we go?
I've got a webinar on Saturday. I've got a few tickets left. The webinar is entitled "The Female Orgasm in Islam and Muslim Cultures," and in that webinar, I'm kind of delving into um, the female orgasm or sexual pleasure, not only in Islamic religion, what the Quran, Hadith, and Islamic scholars have said, but then also looking at the female orgasm in Muslim cultures and understanding the difference, and then speaking about some of the issues that women are facing and trying to provide some practical tips and advice to kind of overcome some of these issues. And I'll be delving into female genital mutilation, female orgasm, female circumcision, because I get a lot of questions about that. So, and that's going to be available for both men and women, but that's on Saturday at 8 o'clock UK time. So I've got a few more tickets if anyone's interested. So, yeah.
Amazing. That sounds like an amazing webinar and really important. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out. Is the link in your bio?
Yes, the link is in my bio. So if you go to my Instagram page, see the link on Eventbrite for more information.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Habib. It was a pleasure talking to you once again. And inshallah,
Pleasure,
I hope
everyone.
we'll talk again soon,
Inshallah.
inshallah.
Barakallahu
Take care.
feek. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.